Welcome back, ladies and gents, to Storytime with Zell. Sit back, relax, as I spin you a tale. Chapters 3 and 4 of Eternal Care Forest. Chapter 3. A Grave Encounter. James and Will only had a few moments to look at each other, terrified, before there was a heavy thud on the roof, followed by slow footsteps going from the door, all the way across the ceiling, then toward the back of the house. And then they stop, and a bit of dust falls down from the ceiling in the back of the hallway. James looks back to the door and goes over to unlock it, Will whispering, "Fuck you doing?" And James whispers back, "Shut up! I'm gonna see who's fucking with us." He tries to open the door, but it doesn't even budge. He tries bashing his shoulder into it, and slowly the door starts to push aside whatever was holding it shut. Shoving with all his strength, James finally gets the door open fully, then backs up and nearly falls over again. Will looks to the door and asks, "What? What is it?" It was dark out, and raining heavy, so it was hard to see. But from what they could see of it, it wasn't like any creature they had ever seen before. It was big as a bear, but had a crocodilian head with many eyes, and was covered head to tail in dark red scales like a lizard. Its hands were large and had deadly talons, like some sort of Komodo dragon out of a terrible nightmare. And it was also split in half, cleanly, straight down the middle, laying in a large pool of its black blood. Will looked at James, who quickly shuts the door again and locks it, leaning against it with his back, saying slowly, I don't know what that was." And Will says, "Now I'm worried more about whatever cut it in half, man." James nods. "Probably whoever was at the door and on the roof." Will slumps back on the couch, rubbing his chin as he says, "What if this is what the old guy was talking about?" James narrowed his brow as he says, "What?" And Will continues, "The old guy, the one from the hotel that told us about the clinic. He said not to go into the forest here because it was protected by magic spirits and demons." James scoffs and says, "Man, listen to yourself. Magic? Demons? Next thing you know, fairies are going to start flying out of your ass." To which Will flips off James. James starts to roll his eyes, but catches a glimpse of something at the back of the hallway, almost dropping his knife as he points it toward the hall while saying, "What the fuck was that?" Will turns on his side to look, confused, as he says, "What did you see?" And James responds with, "There was a guy over there. He was just at the corner of my eyes, but I saw him for a split second. He was big, real big, pale white like an albino or something. And he hesitates before saying any more, and starts to limp off toward the kitchen from the other side. Will saying, He what, James?" in a harsh whisper. And James says softly, "He may have gone in here from the hallway. I've gotta..." Then he moves into the kitchen, looking around and finding nothing. He goes further, into the hallway and checking each room one by one. Will cranes his neck trying to see where James went, then tilts his head as everything in the room starts to get the same blue glow that was around the cabin when they first saw it, that he thought was moonlight. But before he could figure out why, he heard a voice right behind him, and it wasn't James. "Interesting friend you have. Very cautious, but not too bright." Will slowly looks over his shoulder, and his face becomes illuminated in the blue glow, his eyes wide as he stares at the glowing scars on deathly pale skin where eyes should be, through holes in a mask, adorned with a yellow Yahoo smiley face, which only made it more terrifying, with saber teeth poking out from behind the bottom of the mask. Will could see long, sharp teeth lining all the way back where its cheeks should be, behind the edges of its mask, and a large set of what looked like metal horns growing out of its head, the two above its forehead arching upward, having been fitted through his metal and Kevlar-plated hat, obviously inspired by a samurai's jingatsu. They were joined together by what looked like chains, and two lower horns coming out from the sides of its head like a bull, with vibrantly white hair flowing down to its shoulders. Will was about to scream, but instead felt metal covering his mouth, moving its masked face closer to Will's, until it was mere inches away as it says softly, "Shush." Then looks over to the hallway as James comes back around the corner saying, "I must be losing it getting cut off as he sees the pale creature covering Will's mouth. Its right arm looked like it was completely mechanical, black metal with white fingers and highlights along the joints, with two small white knives on the forearm. And it was wearing a black torn-up jacket, open in the front showing his well-toned bare chest. Not a bodybuilder, but definitely strong, covered in faintly blue glowing scars, and black pants with bandages wrapped around one leg. It moves its hand away from Will's mouth and stands up at his full height, standing at what looked like 8 feet tall, 10 including those horns, and arching behind its back were 8 tentacles, reflective silver metal, just like its horns, and spread like a peacock's feathers. The entire time, it was watching James, slowly tilting its head to one side. The pale one slowly steps back from Will, walking to the middle of the room, always facing James, then standing with its arms slightly spread as if taunting James to attack. James was still reeling in his mind at what he was looking at, but he focuses on the pale giant and figures his only option is to kill it, so he and Will can be safe. Gripping his knife tight, James shouts, "You're not gonna kill me!" while stepping toward the pale one, still limping but pumped with adrenaline for a fight. The pale one slowly tilts its head to the other side now, not taking any aggressive stance at all, making itself completely vulnerable. James takes 2 warning swipes with his knife toward it, which doesn't even make it flinch. Then James shrugs as he says, "I fucking warned you," and flips the knife around to reverse his grip on it, and lunges at the giant to plunge his knife as hard as he can into its belly. The blade sticks easily into the pale one's stomach, digging deep. But Will looks on in horror, as even that doesn't make it move away. James, terrified, looks up at the glowing light coming from the creature's face behind that mask, and it says calmly, "I gave you a chance, and this is how you choose to act." James narrows his brow in confusion before starting to gasp for air as the pale one grabs James by the neck and lifts him with one hand, its normal hand even. Will rolls off the couch to try and crawl away, but the giant walks over to Will in just a few long steps and picks him up with its metal hand, lifting them both effortlessly, despite the knife still being lodged in its belly. And with both of them gasping for air, it says, "You killed 2 of my friends today. The first you shot, the second you ran over, and all for a bag of paper and coins." It shakes its head slowly as James and Will start to lose consciousness and pass out. Chapter 4. Pain. James slowly started to wake up, sighing and saying, "Good God, what a nightmare." Then snaps his eyes open when he realizes he can't move. His head, hands, and feet were bound tight, with straps on what felt like some kind of medical bed. With his trench coat parted, and his shirt cut open cleanly up the middle, with his boots removed. Darting his eyes around, trying to figure out where he was. The walls were dark, like stone, even the roof. Was he underground? There was a large computer terminal with what looked like some sort of holographic display forming several screens in front of 3 keyboards. The screens having several readouts of data, and a clear picture of both James and Will on one of them. Looking around more, on the other side of the room, just a few feet away from James, was another medical bed, with a familiar body strapped to it. His shoes missing, and jacket and shirt split open, just like James's, to expose their chests. Will, wake up, damn it!" James shouted. Will narrowing his brow and coming to, mumbling, "What?" James and Will both start screaming suddenly as hands grab their feet, each on the broken side, and wiggles their broken leg and foot vigorously for a couple seconds before stopping, and they hear, "Wakey, wakey." The pale one walks around the medical beds to stand by their heads, now wearing a smooth white trench coat with his black pants from earlier, and no longer with the knife in his belly. Just another faintly glowing scar that was already healing further before their very eyes. Kneeling down to look at them while saying, "We got off on poor introductions. I had to test you to see if you had reason or compassion. Unfortunately, you failed. My name is XelionGraves. Professor Graves, you may have heard of, Founder and lead psychologist of Eternal Care Asylum and Pediatric Care? I'm sure you're familiar with it. You shot David there, and pointed a shotgun at the children." Xelion then takes out a photograph of the nurse that William shot, and shows it to both of them while adding, "He was a father of 2. James yells, "It wasn't his fault!" To which Xelion responds calmly, "Yes, it was. Both in equal favor, it was his fault, just as it was your fault. You both decided to go make some fast money together." Will shaking as he says, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought he was a cop, I swear it." Xelion then turns to face William while saying, "Oh, and that makes it all better for your kind." As Will shuts his eyes tight and starts to cry. Xelion takes out another photo, this one of a young sleeping deer, with long saber teeth similar to his own, showing the picture to both of them as he says, her name was Sarah, mother of 3. You didn't even realize she was shredded and trapped under your car when you crashed. You didn't even stop to look. James snapping back, "Who gives a fuck about a goddamn deer?" And Zell turns to look at James to say coldly, "Life." Before walking between them and grabbing their feet to give another wiggle and make them scream. Then afterwards says, "She was pregnant with the 4th when you hit her. Musk deer, I might add, if you couldn't get that from the teeth. Do you even have the slightest idea how rare they are now, thanks to your kind?" James looks over to William, who still had tears streaming down his face, terrified that Zell was going to kill them. And James tries to muster a straight face and say, "So, we robbed your clinic, killed your friend and your favorite pet deer, You gonna kill us for that, then? Is that it? Xelion turns slowly to face James and say, "Who said anything about killing you?" While reaching over to place his hands on James and Will's faces. Dead people can't learn anything. No, I don't kill, and I'll make certain neither of you die. After all, I am a doctor. Then Xelion slowly caresses their cheeks gently, before ripping James's right ear and Will's left ear in half with his claws, making them scream in pain while leaving their eardrums intact so they could still hear everything he did to them. 4 hours pass, with Xelion casually torturing James and Will, his claws easily tearing through their clothes and skin, while making them bleed all over themselves. But at the same time he was very selective where he cut, saying, "Don't want to nick the wrong artery now. We can't have you bleeding to death after all." Will finally screaming, "What do you want from us?" Xelion turns and kneels down to be level with Will's face, as he says, "I want you to live through consequence, Will. You and James both will live a long old time, many years, here with me." And smiles behind his mask, patting Will's face softly with his metal hand before standing up and adding, "Now, all this scent of blood is making me hungry, so I'm gonna go find some meat. Anything I can deny for you two?" Chuckling as he moves away from them and heads upstairs and opens a trap door in the ceiling. James winces and looks over to Will, then down, trying to see his restraints as he tugs on them with his arms, tugging and shaking them as hard as he can while saying, "Will, can you get anything free?" Will kept his eyes shut and says weakly, "Just let me die." With James snapping, "Hey, we're getting out of this. I never gave up on you since we were kids, and I'm not stopping now. Got it?" And Will opens his eyes and looks at James, slowly nodding and trying to work his wrists and fingers far enough to try picking at the straps holding his arms down. James tries the same, and the straps start to loosen after some effort, though curling their hands like this makes searing pain shoot through their arms from all the cuts. Soon, James has one hand free, and immediately starts on his other hand. And once getting it loose, he starts loosening off the strap holding his head down, then going for his legs. Will also starts getting the strap loose enough to pull his hand free, and James hops off the table to help Will with the rest, saying, all right, let's get the hell out of here, Will." Will nods and quickly heads for the stairs, but stops short when a familiar blue glow starts to light the stairs up again. Whispering, "He's coming back." James looks around quickly, spotting a hallway and stairs leading down, leading that way quickly while whispering, "This way." James looks around in confusion, as downstairs there seems to be a sandy beach oasis, complete with a raft, with several pillows and a large umbrella on it. Will pulls James aside before he can ask any questions, though, hiding under the staircase as Xelion walks down it calmly, saying, "Oh, boys, you seem to have left your tables. Where did you run off to?" Will pressing James against the wall as they watch Xelion looking around, barely breathing and doing everything they can to hold still. Xelion walks to the water's edge and looks to the surface while saying, "Did you take a dip to nurse your owies and find the cavern? Or maybe you're down here with me?" Looking over to the far wall in a small room with a large, ornate black and white carpet with a Celtic design. Taking off his mask and breathing deep. His mouth is more a mass of large, long, interlocking teeth, going all the way up the sides of his mouth where his cheeks should be, and stopping below his ears, and a thin vertical scar on his chin, letting him use his lower jaw halves independently like a snake does. The sight makes James gasp softly, which makes Xelion stop, and turn to face James and Will, and start to slowly approach them. But in an odd way, as if he couldn't actually see them standing in front of him. Xelion comes within just a few feet of James and Will, and James could now easily see that in place of eyes, Xelion only had a bunch of glowing scars on his face. He was completely blind. Xelion breathes deep a few times before walking back over to the carpeted area and looking around there, with James and Will letting out a quiet sigh of relief, though their blood runs cold a moment later when Xelion says, "Standing that close, I could easily hear your hearts beating, you know. Honestly, I could smell you the moment I walked downstairs," and turns to face them directly and accurately from across the room, adding, "Personally, I think you should have gone for a swim. The cavern isn't more than 50 feet away. Quick swim, and you're there, nice and dry, making a run for it." James and Will look to each other, confused, before Xelion adds, "I'll tell you what," clapping his hands together, "I'll give you a full 10-minute head start," and puts his hands in his pockets, waiting for a few seconds before chuckling and tilting his metal fingers sideways, clicking together and resembling a sword hilt, his metal thumb tilting down and forward like a handguard, and a long, black, double-edged sword slides out of his metal hand, the length of a samurai's katana, with a triangular notch halfway down the blade, sighing as he points it toward James and Will, the two small white knives on his forearm flicking outward like the string of a bow, and the sound of pressurized air rushes out of his arm, and half the blade shoots out from the notched section, sticking several inches into the wall between James and Will's heads. Then he says, "Well, go on. Start running," as a replacement blade slides into place from inside the remaining half of Xelion's sword arm. James and Will quickly take off their coats and start running together to the water's edge, taking a deep breath and diving in, and swimming as hard and fast as they can. And a small ways underwater, there indeed was a tunnel, and after exactly 50 feet through it, the water opened up to a large cave with plenty of dry ground to run on, at least dry enough for a cavern. Thank you all for listening. This has been Chapters 3 and 4 of Eternal Care Asylum in Storytime with Zell, with me, XelionGraves. Tune in next time where James and Will continue their desperate attempt at an escape. Thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you next time. Later.